People trusted cosmos to not degrade into an untrustworthy traditional currency. What a new version of Cosmos suggests is to issue additional inflation to make newly minted coins the property of the treasury, giving people more freedom to enjoy the pursuit of happiness. Doesn't that sound brilliant? These revolutionary shenanigans ultimately ended in a quasi-despotic, powerful state spearheaded by Napoleon, who started a bloody war for the domination over the globe. Welcome to Cryptosopher. In our today's video, we're going to be looking at the way our cultural perspectives, our cultural norms and values, our cultural outlooks are shaping not only our mental life, but also the world around us. They influence not only the way we see the world, but the way we change the world around us. And depending on whether we take this matter seriously, whether we take this understanding into account when we develop our new projects as a society, cryptocurrency ideas are either going to be totally undermined or propelled to new heights. Now, there is a great variety of cultural perspectives, but I decided to handpick two of them because they are really pertinent to the topic of this video. The first one is related to the so-called Western mode of thinking, and the other one is related to the so-called Eastern mode of thinking. Now, I'm saying so-called because neither of the models are exclusive to either Western countries or Eastern countries. Those perspectives should be rather interpreted as a rough guide to improve our understanding rather than something that exists ontologically. Okay, with that out of the way, let's proceed. So, the Western mode of thinking is depicted here as an arrow that overrides a lot of small arrows. Those small arrows could be thought as individuals or individual groups. Each of them is pursuing their own goals. And so there is a variety of directions with respect to those tiny blue arrows. However, when there is a democratic feeling that there is an overriding discovery, a new way of life, a novel invention that is going to shape the world, then everyone is expected to somehow align with it. So one example could be the invention of Facebook. When Facebook came about, it was expected that almost everyone is going to use Facebook. If you haven't got Facebook, you could be somehow ostracized, or you could be seen as an outlier, as a weirdo. Now, times have changed now, and social media platforms have evolved, and so there are now new social media platforms that have taken the spotlight, and so things have changed yet again. A new arrow has come along, a new red arrow has come along, and now it's not so weird to say that you're not interested in Facebook and you're not going to be on Facebook, and that's okay. You're no longer an outsider because there's a new overarching theme that has come along and influenced the society. And the same can be said about smartphones. If you say to someone that you haven't got a smartphone and that you're not using it, chances are you will be looked at as a hermit, someone unusual in their beliefs, in their way of life. There is some kind of force that is drawing you towards accepting this new technological development. The Eastern mode of thinking is represented by this heart-shaped figure. So this heart-shaped figure is not representative of each individual. Each individual is an arrow, a red arrow, and together they make up this figure that is a societal figure that transcends each individual understanding, each individual direction. And so here you can see that there is a mismatch between the individual and the society. And so what the society wants, the rules, the customs, are not for the individual to change. Well, there are situations, of course, in which an individual will be bestowed the right to change the customs, but even this bestowal will be granted and will be seen as the effect of this whole heart-shaped community upon this individual. So it's like a divine grace that allows this individual to get the right to change something. So this change doesn't come about as the will of the citizens per se, or the will of the individuals. Whereas in the Western mode of thinking, you can see that although the red arrow is overarching tiny blue arrows, still the shape of the arrows is the same. So societal change is accessible by an individual, and an individual can gain popularity. An individual's idea, an individual's perception of the world, of the future, may gain popularity among the peers. And so that's the mechanism by which changes occur, by which time goes on, marching from one event to another event, and each new event is superseded socially by a novel understanding that is finally accepted by virtually anyone, or it can be reached, can be accessed, and everyone can partake of this inspiring activity related to the propagation of something novel. Now, from this cursory analysis that I have just provided, it may seem as though this Western model is more exciting and that it's better, but actually there isn't much difference between the way change is happening. The difference is between the way the changes are perceived. So, the same global change, like for example the introduction of smartphones in your everyday life or the introduction of social media, the same change is either seen as socially necessitated, or it is seen as something that emerges out of the perspective of individuals and then it spreads out to everyone. But the end result is the same. The change happens. It's just that in one case, this change is perceived to be individually inspired, governed by the creative power of an individual and the collective desire to adopt a wonderful new way of thinking. Whereas from the Eastern perspective, this social process is a kind of a thing in itself, and the phenomenon of an individual starting up this process is seen as the society granting this person the right to do so. At the end, there isn't that much difference with respect to the end result. Change happens, but the way it is perceived is different. Up until now, the way we discussed changes was in a positive light, but you could also cast some changes that happen to a given society in a negative light. All the more, this opinion can be substantiated, and so there are some changes that most people perceive as negative, and they could be called negative. Negative developments are interpreted as coercive developments within the Western mode. There is always someone or something to blame that has changed the global direction in a way that diminishes the well-being of most people. And this thing, this movement, this current, this social current, this idea or this person is to blame. And so when this person gets out of office, when a new idea is vindicated and the old idea is thrown off the pedestal, cast away, it's then that the negative development is rectified. So whenever there is a negative development, there is a positive one awaiting in the future, and it results in blaming individuals, ideas, or movements, and then exercising the right, the people's right, the democratic right to alter those negative developments into new developments which are supposed to be better. Now, within the Eastern mode of thinking, those negative developments are embedded within the fabric of society. They are part and parcel of a natural rhythm, the ebb and flow of nature. And so rebelling against them is not very smart. Whenever the social organism decides to rectify those developments, then will be the proper time to address them. And of course, those changes will be challenged through certain individuals. And so it's not that the pace is necessarily slower within the Eastern mode of thinking. It's just that the attribution of this rectification is different. The social organism is breathing in and breathing out. And this breath is natural. So that's the difference of perception. And when you think about breath, when you think about breathing, this is one of the central pillars of a great many Eastern movements. And it emphasizes circularity. It emphasizes the fact that when you breathe in and breathe out, and then again breathe in and breathe out, nothing changes in a way. It all remains the same. The breathing remains. Whatever is perceived as novel is only novel relative to the immediate event that preceded it. So breathing in is novel with respect to breathing out only if you look at the two adjacent steps. If you have a wider picture, you see the development as part of a circular pattern that has to occur because that's the wheel of life. That's a natural movement of life. That's the way life goes on, and you can't stop it. The goddess of this wheel may choose you to assist her. So you may be chosen as someone representing the transformation from one state to another, but you're just enacting the divine will rather than introducing your own perspective to the masses. So, as we have witnessed, there are upsides and downsides with respect to any mode of thinking, and there is also a separate set of advantages and disadvantages for every viewpoint, for every particular case within a given perspective. Now, if we turn to history, there used to be a movement that used to be seen only in a positive light by the advanced thinkers, and this movement is the Enlightenment movement. During the era of Enlightenment, leading scholars felt that there was no need for an ossified structure such as a church or a monarchy for the society to keep discovering truths about nature and about the society itself. Furthermore, those ossified institutions were thought as a hindrance towards advanced discoveries, and so as a result, there grew an understanding that those institutions need to be done away with. It is interesting to note that an inspiration for such profound changes advocated by leading Enlightenment scholars seems to have been influenced by an idealized version of what an Eastern mode of thinking is. So this semblance of a thirst for an idealized Eastern approach may have originated unconsciously within the minds of those scholars. Yet it does seem like a good model to describe what they were after. And so if we incorporate all the bits and pieces of the Western mode of thinking and the adjustments to this very mode that Enlightenment scholars were advocating, then you could probably describe this model in the following way. No one, as it were, should have the right to take the mind of a person and change it in such a way that it will be coerced by various religious and governmental institutions that have their sovereignty not defined by the person, by the people, and for the people, but are designed to extract resources, to coerce and subjugate, and to enjoy the lust for power. So that's the common criticism of the West that started within the Western thinking itself near the Age of Enlightenment. And it took various forms. Some forms allowed for God to exist, but societies and the elites corrupted the idea of God and mistranslated it to the common folk. Others were almost willing to let go of the idea of any supreme being as such. The public need to be enlightened, and this enlightenment should bring about power that will be sufficient for the ossified institutions to disappear. And this disappearance of the ossified structures would be accompanied by a joyful experience of liberty, equality, and fraternity. This sort of vision, this sort of process was meant to make way for a flexible, decentralized approach to governance, giving people more freedom to enjoy the pursuit of happiness. Doesn't that sound brilliant? Doesn't that sound good and worth implementing? That was what those Enlightenment scholars thought. It didn't take long for the seeds of the Enlightenment thought to bear their fruit in the form of the French Revolution. So what are the results of the French Revolution? Are they good enough to warrant our approval? Well, it's hard to say. We can just refer to the fact that not only the King of France was murdered, but those who believed in the revolution as a means to bring about changes in the spirit of the Enlightenment. But the murders didn't stop there. The type of government that took over control immediately after the revolution is often described by historians as tyranny. Now, to exacerbate the situation even further, these revolutionary shenanigans ultimately ended in a quasi-despotic, powerful state spearheaded by Napoleon, who started a bloody war for the domination over the globe, and hundreds of thousands of lives perished because of that. Now, to add further insult to injury, after the reign of Napoleon ended, France restored monarchy, the type of government that was criticized by the Enlightenment activists who brought about this bloody revolution. And the end result of that was the restoration of monarchy, since everyone understood that no matter how harsh the reign of the monarchy was, its level of tyranny had never been on par with the terror of the revolutionary age. However, you may object to those conclusions by saying that maybe that's an outlier, maybe that's an error, and typically good intentions should lead to good outcomes. It's just there's no cast iron guarantee that this is going to happen all the time, just as there is no cast iron guarantee just about anything in our lives. Well, let's look at some other examples of good intentions leading to less than perfect outcomes. And our next example will be American independence. The Declaration of Independence occurred during the Age of Enlightenment as well, and the exact date of the Declaration is not that remote from that of the French Revolution. The Declaration of Independence is attributed to 1776, whereas the year of the French Revolution is 1789. Since the gap between the two is so narrow, it makes sense to compare the two more closely. Let's start by comparing the mottos. The motto of the French Revolution, as we have already discussed, is liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, some of the opening sentences of the American Declaration of Independence contain ideas that are not too dissimilar from those of the French Revolution. One could probably say that the motto of the Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, right off the bat, while the mottos look pretty similar, there seems to be a more right-wing bend within the Declaration of Independence. There is no mention of equality as something that we need to work towards, rather that all men were created equal. Now, leaving aside the question that they should have written all people were created equal, and let's believe in good faith that they actually meant all people. Although this interpretation is not the only one, given that some of the founding fathers are known to have been slave owners. Still, let's go along with a more liberal interpretation. However, if we combine our belief that all people are created equal with the fact that there is inevitably a lesser or greater inequality within a given society, it gives the potential to proclaim that any such inequality that arises within a free democratic society is due to the faults of the people themselves. They don't work hard enough. Provided there is no oppressor, there is no external influence, an established authority such as the monarch. So, instead of equality as a goal, equality is a starting point, and ideally, any inequality that arises within a formally free and democratic society can be blamed upon the individuals and not societal forces. So that establishes the groundwork for the push of some right-wing libertarians against Marxism, because their thinking is centered around the individual. They are not ready to acknowledge the existence of unnamed societal forces. So, in their viewpoint, if you get rid of the formal constraints, then anything that you say about the society as a whole is more like your interpretation or opinion. You can't use that reasoning to pin down the problem, if there is any, at the level of society. Any issue is bound to be looked at from the perspective of the individual. Any other perspective, supra-individual perspective, any societal perspective, isn't going to be truly scientific. A further indication of right-wing inclinations behind the Declaration of Independence is the mention of the Creator. So, the monarchs should not have the right to alienate any power from the Creator. And so, the notion of the Creator isn't done away with completely. Rather, we see a direct link between the Creator and the people, thus connecting the democratic principles of governance with the wish of the Supreme Being. But still, there's the rub. Such unalienable rights as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are surely taken away from someone who's in prison. And at no point does the early American government hint at the abolition of the prison system. So what about those people who are locked up? What about those who await capital punishment? What about them? What about their rights? Are they alienated? But if they are, then it means that those rights aren't unalienable. Sure, you can say that the people can alienate the rights because there is this connection between the will of the people and the creator. Only the creator can take back those rights, and the will of the people, represented by a democratic government, acts on behalf of this will of God. So that could be the possible interpretation of those unalienable rights that are alienable in reality. Previously, when we were discussing some of the general aspects of the Western mode of thinking, we mentioned the notion of blame. If anything goes awry, it is possible to identify a structure or a person, an individual or a country that is to blame. And a substantial portion of the Declaration of Independence is comprised of exactly that, the blame. And the blame rests upon the shoulders of the British Empire and its king. What is interesting, however, is that the same accusations written down in this document may well apply to the contemporary United States. It seems that the victim has become a carbon copy of their oppressor, and we can prove this point by point. So the first group of accusations is related to the military power of the British Empire, the way they quarter their troops around the world, and the way they use those troops for war. The history of the 20th century showed that about 80% of all armed conflicts around the world were started by the United States of America. And the United States is also known to control about 900 military bases all around the world, thus making the United States, in effect, the successor of the British Empire, and in many ways the successor of its military policy, in the attempt to control and govern the whole world. Another interesting point is that you could actually see the parallels between the attitudes of the nascent United States government and its British prehistory versus the attitude of modern liberal movements within the US towards what they view as patriarchy or patriarchal structures. Just look at the first sentence. You need to substitute the present King of Great Britain into patriarchy. The history of patriarchy is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these individuals, societies, cultures. Doesn't that fit a bit too well? Doesn't that show that there are the same underlying principles between any political movements, any political struggles? Now compare what the Declaration of Independence says about the then present King of Great Britain versus what might be said of the recent US history with respect to the 2003 war in Iraq. Namely, I mean those lines about cruelty. Cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Is that written about the then King of Great Britain? Or is it about civilian casualties of the 2003 war in Iraq? But military power isn't the only way of expressing state power. A much more intricate way of influencing the world affairs is by means of law, when the legislation of one country is enforced upon the whole globe. The allegations against the King of Great Britain put forward within the Declaration of Independence again seem to be directed and the mirrored version of the United States, but some 200 years later. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our constitution. Isn't that what the US is doing at the moment throughout the world? Cutting off trade with all parts of the world. Isn't that the core mechanism of the US sanctions? Transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretend offenses. Doesn't that correlate with the way the US administers justice throughout the world and captures individuals, someone who they view as transgressors, using either official channels or undercover operations? And now, speaking of those covert operations, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. Well, it has been estimated that since the end of the World War II and up until the fall of the Soviet Union, there had been more than 60 covert regime change operations all around the world carried out by the US. Now, you may ask, what does that all have to do with the current state of affairs? Surely we have moved on, we have made some progress with respect to our thinking. Modernity has lots of technology and access to all kinds of knowledge via Google and other networks that should make it possible for society as well as its thinkers to learn from past errors. The diagnosis made by the thinkers of the 19th and early 20th century, such as Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, they do seem to have quite different outlooks on the world, but they do converge in a way with respect to the diagnosis that they offer for the Western civilization. Sure, oftentimes they do not offer clear-cut solutions. It is easier to diagnose something rather than to offer a genuine and working solution. However, one should still be thankful to those thinkers for their diagnosis. Well, that is, in case we accept their diagnosis. Well, let's examine their issue. And their issue is alienation. The Western society estranges itself from the connection with the supreme being, the supreme subject. In effect, subjectivity dies. Only objective science, empirical investigation is deemed worthy. And by a Freudian turn, this obsession with objectivity and empirical science becomes a new religion, becomes a new church, worshipping technology and disregarding personal dimensions of human psyche, human life, and society. This results in commodification of everything. Activities stop having purely social and religious meaning. They start acquiring economic properties, economic values, and then those economic values supersede the initial sense entirely, and so the meaning is lost. Everything is broken down into goods and services, great in number and variety, and one is faced with a chaos of commodified options, none of which seem to offer a genuine connection with meaning. Everything can be bought and sold. Things are to lose additional meaning. And that contradicts human aspirations for deeper meaning. So, unhappy consciousness by Hegel, alienation by Marx, the death of God by Nietzsche, and the repressed unconscious, those are part and parcel of the same diagnosis. And it seems that Freud may have gone a little bit further in diagnosing this issue properly, because this new age is creating a religion of capitalism, thereby creating something idealistic, something religious, But unlike previous eras of religious experience, it has a tendency to forget its own spiritual dimension, and so people become deluded with a capitalistic way of life without having a discernment to realize they are captured by a new religion. They lose this critical thinking, and if they can't comprehend it, they can't escape it. And that's why history starts repeating itself at a shallow level. It is actually pertinent to mention the so-called notion of hauntology, which was proposed by Derrida as a combination of haunted and ontology. So it is related to this repetition of the past that is haunting us, and the inability of the modernity to offer something genuinely new. If the spirit has been taken away from you, if subjectivity has been alienated from you, then you can't develop further, and so you are stuck, and it seems that there is no escape. This sense of being stuck was amplified yet again by a 2008 financial crisis. People are taking out more and more loans in order to fill in the gap in their needs, especially in the face of rising inflation that corrodes away the achievements of the past. So inflation is a slow process of alienation. Disappointed with this haunted atmosphere of modernity, exacerbated by the over-centralized financial power that seems ossified and unable to let go of its tight control over the money printing machine. This is what has precipitated a new era of cryptocurrencies. And it seems that cryptocurrency trailblazers saw an opportunity to free everyone from the shackles of this power. However, don't you see some similarities between modern cryptocurrency aspirations and the strive for liberty, equality, and fraternity that led to the French Revolution, liberating in some respects and very bloody in some other respects? Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud have contributed to the diagnosis of those issues, mainly in the 19th century, and a long time has gone since their revelations being made public. You would hope that societies would learn those diagnoses and would learn from their own mistakes and take into account this renewed understanding. However, it turns out not to be the case. Actually, within the 20th century, the mindset of Karl Popper has begun to dominate. And this mindset is that of a positivistic agenda that discards those internal psychological dimensions of philosophy uncovered by Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. Those thinkers, since they didn't use empirical data, were labeled as fraud, and hence the input that they were trying to bring to the table was also discarded, kicking the can of understanding and correcting your own mistakes further down the road. A somewhat surprising example corroborating this fact is the story of cryptocurrencies. In particular, I would like to emphasize one very successful story building trust, but also betraying this trust, according to the good old Western tradition. So which cryptocurrency do I have in mind? And the answer is Cosmos. Cosmos can be described as a great project that has gone pear-shaped with respect to its development. How so? Why is it great? And why has it gone pear-shaped? There are multiple reasons that make Cosmos an outstanding example of what's good about the cryptocurrency vibe. Firstly, project co-founders Jay Kwon and Ethan Buckman were one of the first to offer a robust, well-thought-through solution to the proof-of-work deficiency inherent in Bitcoin. The proof-of-work protocol requires immense power consumption, thereby affecting the environment in a negative way. Jay Kwon and Ethan Buckman offered a robust solution to this problem and developed their own version of the proof-of-stake mechanism that is more environmentally friendly. Moreover, the effort and expertise that they built within their solution was offered by them to everyone, virtually for free, since they founded a Cosmos Hub, a project meant to serve as a network of cryptocurrencies, each of which could be set up by virtually anyone at the tip of their fingers. The proof that they were doing all this in good faith lies within their own philosophical understanding of the world. Ethan Buckman has shared more of its view publicly, and his views are not too dissimilar in essence from the motto of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Sure, his thought is a much more modern rendition of those notions. Nevertheless, you can feel the spirit of thinking about the good of the society, of avoiding centralized approaches, of acknowledging the importance of environment and the value of sharing with respect to the creation of value. Those are key distinct features of Ethan Buckman's approach to life. And it's not only positive, it's very contagious. And you can see how it has spread over into his work. Now, even though Jay Kwon appears to be much less willing to ruminate at length about his views, bits and bytes and snippets of his worldview can be surmised from his public utterances, opinions, and the way he states the goals for Cosmos. Namely, when he says, the design goals are to become free from the influence of state actors and mega corporations like Google, that is very well in line with the desire to stop power domination. Further, he says, to become complete as a reference standard worthy of promoting for educational purposes. Here, too, we sense the spirit of the Enlightenment. It's not just a reframed idea of the good set back against the domination of power. It's also education and dissemination of those ideas, which are of value within this framework. And so Jay Kwon's contribution could be viewed as a contemporary example of the spirit of enlightenment at work. However, if you remember the first part of the video, we mentioned how this well-meaning spirit of the enlightenment used to produce less than perfect results, sometimes leading to effects that are opposite from the intended ones. So how about this contemporary rendition of this Enlightenment project? What has happened to it? Well, some of the issues with the Cosmos network seem to stem from its very foundation. True, they introduced a proof-of-stake mechanism that is more environmentally friendly versus that of Bitcoin. However, you could also name a drawback of this Cosmos network in comparison to Bitcoin, and that is essentially unlimited money printing. Bitcoin has a finite set of liquidity to be mined. On the contrary, Cosmos does not have those limitations, and its inflation amounted according to certain estimates, to be 10 to 20%. That is huge, that is enormous, and that is related to the erosion of trust. Although trust, especially the lack of it, has been the central point of concern with respect to traditional currency. And so, if trust is eroded there, but then there is a new solution where trust is equally eroded, then how is this new solution better? Right, that's a good question. But on top of that, there has been another factor of trust erosion with respect to traditional currencies, and that is centralization. The accumulation of money printing properties within the select few financial institutions has been criticized recently as essentially a form of a power grab. Now, what a new version of Cosmos 2.0 suggests is, among other things, to issue additional inflation and to make newly minted coins the property of the treasury. That means a huge step towards the centralization akin to that of traditional currencies. And that's why it created such a backlash among the community, especially among the fans of the Cosmos project. And it is understandable, since people trusted Cosmos to not degrade into an untrustworthy traditional currency. But in effect, Proposal 82 for the Cosmos 2.0 is doing exactly that. And so this betrayal of trust can be sensed in the comments that lots of frustrated cryptocurrency fans had to voice. What's noteworthy is that this critique of Cosmos 2.0 hasn't been propounded solely by former fans, but also by professionals. And there is one professional who has shared their philosophical outlook. So let's take a look at what this person has to say. First, the author acknowledges the fact that there is an ideal reality besides the material reality, that the world of ideas does play a significant role and maybe even takes precedence over the material world when we talk about social interactions and inspirations, especially new projects that the trailblazers want others to get involved with. I would say that this is a critique of the 20th century positivist thinking that tends to belittle the role of ideas and emphasize the role of empirical and material reality. And this critique is pertinent to the long-term effects of trailblazers projects, since even if you've got a lot of inspiration and if you've got technical acumen, you should not beguile yourself with the fact that once you've converted your technical acumen into a project, that this material project is going to sustain itself without the creator, without the founder. Thus, what the author is calling the founder culture is a very important element to any project's long-term success. This idea of personal responsibility and personal direction and a synthesis between the energy of the creator and the energy of the community is something that used to be described in mythology, in classical literature, in the literature of the early modern era. But this ideal has been forgotten. Once those inspired individuals that seem to be great leaders see their role as moving towards a material system, their goals and inspirations become tainted with the coarseness of the material world that prefers money over trust, material achievements versus spiritual achievements. So this loss of founder culture leads to an imbalance and leads to the quality of proposed solutions being perishable. And as for the second element of the diagnosis that I wanted to touch on, it is related to storytelling as a means to erase this boundary between materialistic desires and spiritual desires, between hard cash value and eternal values. Storytelling is something that smoothes out the contradictions between the material and the ideal. It connects the two such that the end result is more than the sum of its parts. I think that the most recent example of such a synthesis was provided by Steve Jobs. You may like or dislike Apple products, but you can't deny that this person managed to channel his energy into material products that are not limited to their materiality, to their corporeality, but rather exceed it and enthuse the followers with a sense of belonging to a certain type of culture, rather than only seeing those products as pieces of matter belonging to the owners. So it seems that we really lack Steve Jobs, and our society would definitely benefit from someone like Steve Jobs involved in new cryptocurrency projects. In my opinion, if such a person comes along, then we'll see a cryptocurrency boom that will supersede in quality and magnitude whatever cryptocurrency development followed before. So, as investors, we would probably want to be on the lookout for such personalities, since investing in the products and services made by such people is a sure way to make some money. Oh, I've been criticizing the materialistic approach, but now I kind of made a U-turn and boiled everything down to pure materialistic value. I don't know what to say. What are your thoughts? Do share your opinion in the comments below. And if you like the content of this channel, consider liking and subscribing. See you in the next video.